Some people talk all their lives, but never truly hear anything. Not the wind, not the water, not the people standing right beside them. They are always speaking, always explaining, always filling the silence with noise. Have you ever felt that someone was talking at you, but never really listening? Or maybe you are that person. Today, I want to tell you the story of a fisherman named Samuel, a man who knew everything about the sea, but had forgotten how to be still enough to hear it. In a quiet coastal village, where the mornings smelled of salt and the evenings were painted in deep orange, there lived an old fisherman named Samuel. He had spent 50 years on the water. He knew where the fish gathered before the storm. He knew which winds brought rain and which brought calm. People in the village respected him deeply. Younger fishermen came to him for advice. His wife had stood beside him for 40 years. His son had grown up watching him from the shore. By every measure, Samuel's life was rich. But there was one thing no one spoke about openly. Samuel never stopped talking long enough to hear anyone else. At the dinner table, he spoke over his wife. On the boat, he gave orders without asking questions. When his son tried to share his troubles, Samuel always had an answer ready. Before the question was even finished, people stopped bringing him their hearts, because they knew there was no room for their words inside his. One evening, Samuel's son came home with heavy eyes. He sat across the table and began to speak slowly. "Father, I've been thinking about leaving the village. I don't think fishing is the life I want." Samuel put down his cup before his son could finish. "Nonsense," he said firmly. "This is our trade. This is who we are. You will understand when you're older." His son nodded quietly, said nothing more, and 3 weeks later, he was gone. Samuel stood at the empty chair for a long time. He told himself his son was being foolish. He told himself the boy would come back. But deep inside, in the place where honest things live, he knew something else. He had been given a moment, and he had filled it with his own voice. His wife said softly that evening, "He just wanted you to hear him, Samuel, not to fix him, just to hear him." Samuel stared at the floor. He had no answer, and that silence, the one he had never chosen, felt heavier than anything he had ever carried on the boat. That night, he could not sleep. He walked down to the shore and stood beside his old fishing boat. The water was completely still, and for the first time in years, Samuel said nothing. He just stood there, and slowly, in that silence, he began to hear things he had missed for a very long time. The next morning, an old boat builder named Thomas was repairing a hull near the dock. Samuel watched him work. Slow, careful, deliberate. Thomas would tap the wood once, then press his ear gently against it. Tap again. Listen again. Samuel walked over. "Why do you keep stopping?" Thomas looked up with calm eyes. "I'm listening to the boat," he said simply. "Every crack speaks before it breaks. If you tap and keep moving, you miss it. But if you tap and go quiet, the wood tells you exactly where it hurts." He ran his hand along the hull. Most people think a boat needs a strong captain, but what it really needs is someone who knows when to stop and listen. He looked at Samuel with the kind of look that carries no judgment, only truth. The sea has been trying to tell you things for 50 years. Have you ever gone quiet long enough to hear it? Samuel had no words. He walked back to his boat, sat down inside it, and did something he had not done in decades. He simply sat, in silence, and listened. That evening, Samuel wrote a letter to his son, not full of advice, not full of answers, just 6 words. "Tell me what your heart wants." When his wife sat beside him after dinner, Samuel did not speak first. He looked at her and asked, "How are you?" "Really?" She blinked. It had been so long since he had asked. She spoke for a long time. Samuel said nothing. He just listened. And when she finished, she reached over and held his hand. The next morning on the boat, a young fisherman made a mistake with the nets. Samuel felt the familiar urge to shout, to correct, to explain. Instead, he took a breath. He waited, and then asked quietly, "What do you think went wrong?" The young man looked up, surprised, then grateful. He figured it out himself. Samuel watched him and thought of his son, of all the times he had offered answers to people who only needed to be heard. Slowly, something in his chest began to loosen. A reply came from his son 2 weeks later. Short, careful, but it came. They began writing, back and forth, slowly, like two boats finding their way toward each other across open water. Samuel did not tell his son what to do. He asked questions. He listened to the answers, and in that listening, something broken began to quietly repair itself. The village noticed a change in Samuel, not loud or dramatic, just a stillness about him that had never been there before. When people spoke to him now, they felt it, the rare and gentle feeling of being truly heard. Some came to sit with him just for that, just to be in the presence of someone who was no longer in a hurry to respond. Samuel still went out on the water every morning, but now, before casting his nets, he would sit for a moment, eyes closed, listening to the sound the sea made when no one was talking over it, and every time, it told him something new. Moral of the story: silence is not emptiness. It is the space where truth finally has room to speak. The wisest people are not those with the most answers. They are those who have learned to truly listen, because when you go quiet, you do not lose your voice. You find someone else's.